Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker-Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process in discussions between the authors, narrators, producers, and post-production teams that bring them all together, as well as guests who have listened to the audiobooks and have questions for the creative teams. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Hello, I am Becky Parker-Geist. I am the host of the Audiobook Connection podcast, Behind the Scenes with the Creative Teams. I'm also president of Bay Area Independent Publishers Association and the CEO of Pro Audio Voices, providing audiobook production, distribution, marketing, and podcasting services. And today I have with me Karin Fisher-Golton, author of My Amazing Day. Karin is an editor specializing in children's book editing and also creates illustration descriptions for blind readers. She also helps authors developing educational audio supplements. So Karin, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I kind of like starting at the very beginning. I love hearing how people get into the whole indie author and publishing world, kind of what stimulated that for you, and tell us a little bit about the start of that journey for you.
Okay, yeah. Well, for when you said the start, first I went back. It started way back before I remember. When I was not even 2. My mother taught me to read. She was holding up cards, and so my love of children's books went way from back there.
I love that.
Yes, and then I had different paths. I had technical writing, teaching. It's really writing and working with children were sort of the two themes, and they came together in children's books. And so I got serious about that, and I worked on my writing skills, and eventually that led me to independent publishing, which was this project, My Amazing Day. It's a book for 0 to 3 to start babies and toddlers on lifetime habits of gratitude.
Yeah.
And that began, it actually wasn't my idea. A good friend of mine who is a designer and a friend of hers who's a photographer now, a friend of mine too, they came to me and they said that we want to write a book to help babies and toddlers start habits of gratitude. And I loved that idea. And I loved the idea of working with those too. So when you traditional publish a picture book, if you're not an author illustrator, the publisher matches you with they pick the illustrator for the most part.
Right.
And so it was a natural thing to self-publish because we wanted to work together. Right. And so, we did that project together, and it was just a joy creating with those two. And so that's how I got into the world of independent publishing. It wildly, like the photos for that book were shot in Novato, and Bay Area, was meeting in Novato at that time. So anyway, somehow I found out about it. I can't even remember how, but when I was like, oh, this is my place. I mean, and I've been in many professional organizations over the years, but I just want to say that it is the best for just information and warmth and community. I just cannot say enough about it.
Yeah. Just for our listeners that don't know, so BAIPA, you can find it at BAIPA.org. That's Bay Area Independent Publishers Association.org. And yeah, go ahead, Karin.
Yes. No, I'm glad you did, because do it, people. Yes. So that's how I got there. So then that was very, very helpful with my process with that book. And it continues to be, and the book's still selling 10 years in.
Yeah.
But
I want to just interrupt for a second, because I want to highlight that, because many authors feel like when they start, they publish, they launch, and then that's kind of it. Now it's just going to sit there, unless they're really doing a lot. So I just wanted to call that out. I want people to hear that you're still earning from your book 10 years in.
Right. That's right. Going. It's still selling. I'm still getting notes from people. My grandchild loved this. And yeah, it's great. And, it takes I would say, yeah, if I put more effort into it, it would sell more. But I put some effort into it. It's momentum and like pushing the thing, nudge, nudge, nudge. So anyway, so then there I was at the BEPA meetings and listening to, there's lots of author publishers, and there are also people who support them, like you, and now like me. I had done editing in the technical writing world earlier, but I just heard people standing up, people talking about being editors, and there was no one that specialized in children's books. And of all, I think it's particularly important to have a specialist in children's books for an editor, because children's brains, literally are different from ours. So,
yeah.
And I have this education background, so I know something about like what children learn when and how their vocabularies develop and how the ways of thinking of things develop. And then from my background of all my years working on my writing, I knew there's genres within children's books. There's picture book and chapter books and middle grade novels and nonfiction. And so I just could see that there was a need for that. And when I thought about it, it was like, oh my gosh, just like everything comes together. My editing, the children, the education, and everything I've done in my life. Like, I really like listening to people and understanding what's important to them. And that is so important in an editor, to like understand the author's vision and, work towards their vision, not towards like what you think your vision might be. And so it just really came together. And so I hung up my electronic, what do you call the shingle? I made a website and I started mentioning it at the BEPA meetings, and the people really came, like, unlike with the writing that has been such a slow journey. Mm-hmm. In this case, people came and they just have kept coming really remarkably. Like, when I have time in my schedule, someone just like an email comes. That's been great. And I love it. I love the creative process, and I love supporting people in the creative process and seeing it. So.
And I know that you've worked with some of our other authors who have both worked with Pro Audio Voices on their audiobooks, but also have been on this podcast. Tamara Shiloh is one of those, one of those wonderful authors doing great work in the world. Yeah.
Yes, really. She is amazing. She's got her books and she's got her bookstore. Yeah.
Yeah. Multicultural bookstore. Yeah.
Richmond, right near me. I'm lucky to have a bookstore near me thanks to her.
Yeah. That's nice. That's great. Let's just take a short pause and we'll be right back.
Looking for a way to bring your children's book to life in an engaging way for young ones? At Pro Audio Voices, we bring together decades of experience with audio production, teaching, and parenting to craft a listening experience that will delight children and parents alike. If you're looking for an experienced team to bring your children's book to life in audio, check out proaudiovoices.com.
Welcome back. Karin, you sort of did a quick list of some of the things that are special about children's book editing. You want to dive a little deeper into some of that? I mean, one of the first things that comes to mind for me is the vocabulary. But I know that there are more things that you listed there. So what are some of those specific to children's book writing and editing that you are helping authors with?
Let's see. Yeah, so one thing really is like, often the first thing is, what genre does this book really belong in? Is this a picture book? Is this a middle grade novel? Is it for, who is the audience here? So there's that, and really understanding that different age groups. It's one thing that's very interesting is that picture books for a younger age, picture books for 0 to 8, really. Then there's this books called early readers, and there's chapter books that are for the newest readers. And the interesting thing is that the picture books actually can have more sophisticated vocabulary than the early readers and the chapter books, because somebody else, an adult, is reading the picture book to child. But then they're reading them. There's this very narrow range of the early readers and the chapter books where they're reading it to themselves. But that's really important because those are the first books that they read. And then you get to the middle grade novels, and those are more like, that's Charlotte's Web, like the books that we sometimes do read to children also. because they do have a wider vocabulary, but children can also read those to themselves. So there's that. And then I want to say with vocabulary, I'm often it's important to know what a child, a sense of what their vocabulary is. But you also, I always looking at when do you want to stretch and when not? Because reading is how they learn words. So you don't be avoiding challenging words completely, but it takes brain power to understand, to a word, especially if it's new and it's a stretch, you need context. And so one thing I will often point out to my authors is okay, this is not a good moment to introduce that word because you're in the moment of sort of a big reveal and something in the plot, that's when you want their brain on that. But there's another, maybe in a more descriptive moment, that's a great time to introduce a vocabulary word.
Yeah. And one of the things I really love about children's audiobooks is, there are a couple of things. There are many things. I love doing children's audiobooks. But one of them is the help that it can provide in terms of comprehension and fluency. Being able, when you can listen to an audiobook and hear how a word is used in a sentence in the context, it can be really helpful for a child who may, in a text context, sort of stumble over that word or really struggle with it, even if they're trying to sort out what that context around that word is. So I think.
Yeah. And of course, the intonation is another context clue. Yeah. Another reason I think that children's books lend themselves well to audiobooks is that they are written, and especially the picture books and the middle grade novels, they are written to be read aloud, and authors read them aloud in their process. And we want that language to sound beautiful. So they're just made for someone to read aloud and to be beautiful.
Yeah. That's so true. Now, one of the projects that we worked on together was Shalise Bahari's book, Prince and His Mother's Crown, Tales Within My Mother's Hair, which is, it's a whimsical fairy tale about a little boy named Prince who is fascinated with his mother's magical crown of hair. This is a picture book that had, I don't remember how many words, but it was a very, designed for young readers or young, picture books. So to be read to, children to be read to, and beautiful illustrations. And Shalise Bahari herself is legally blind and wants very much to be able to serve this population of children who have vision impairments and to not miss out on these beautiful illustrations. So tell us a little from your experience of what you did is as part of this process. Yeah. And then we'll go from there.
So what I did in this process was, wrote descriptions of the illustrations for visually impaired children. And I will say it wasn't, sorry, I've said 4 thoughts.
That's all right.
First of all, the book, it's probably I think it's probably about less than 500 words. It's a good length for a picture book, and it's a rhyming picture book. And so I was writing descriptions of the illustrations. Another thing about picture books is that they are so good for children's brains because much like you were talking about, the tone of voice is another clue. The pictures add to the story. And sometimes the pictures can even tell parts of the story that aren't in the words at all. They can be partners. Sometimes it's a comic thing, even when there's differences. But there are plenty of studies that show that children get a lot out of experiencing that partnership between the words and the pictures. And I just love that getting to do this because it was giving visually impaired children an opportunity to have that experience. And so I was writing audio descriptions, and I did some research about what sort of best practices for that. And it's the book itself is in rhyme, and it's got some lovely language. And I mean, the descriptions I hope have lovely language too, but it's much more straightforward. It's a different voice, because like, here's what there is to see. And we're letting the children know this is what's in the picture so they can put the things together.
Right.
And when I learned about the best practices, one thing that's interesting, it's like, on one hand, this is all they're going to have. No. So if you don't tell them, they don't know. Don't be shy about it. On the other hand, you want to be concise, obviously, so they can get back to the story. So it's a balance.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to consider what will be useful, what's important for a child to know. And of course, in this story is about the boy loving the mama's hair, and it's very fanciful with it. It's very fun. Like he becomes, at some point, he's fighting dragons in her hair he's got a shield and she's growing fruit in her hair. And so, but the hair was very important, even in the pictures where her hair isn't doing things like becoming a tree, whereas in another book, I might not have described the hair. In this case, it's all about the hair. So I always was like, now it's in a braid. Now it's back with a clip, So there was that. Another thing I noticed that the illustrator did that wasn't really exactly in the text was that the boy, his like princehood grows throughout the story. So in the beginning, his parents have crowns on their heads, but he does not. But in the end, he does. And at some point, she like knights him. So that was all in the illustration. So it was important to note in the beginning that he wasn't wearing a crown. Like you might not think that's important, but to have the contrast for later.
Right. And this was definitely a story where, when you were talking about how sometimes the pictures are telling more of a story or even a different story, that's related, but like these dragons, where if we, from the perspective of audio only, when I'm looking at a manuscript and sort of mapping out what sound effects we would include, I'm using those illustrations also as a guideline. And yet, knowing that if the text is not referring to any dragons and I put in a dragon sound, it's not going to make any sense. So there's the telling of the story that also is happening through the music and sound effects, which has to make sense from an audio-only perspective, and yet can be informed by the illustrations.
Interesting. Yes. Yeah. And it occurs to me those audio effects you put in are a very similar thing where they're giving information and allowing children to put together, put these pieces together. Another thing in those descriptions is so I wouldn't say the people looked happy. I would say somebody is smiling, somebody has bright eyes. And that's part of the spirit of this book. It's very warm and joyful. But that's another thing, by doing that, I'm letting the listeners know these are the clues you get that show that someone's happy. There's also a page where the mother and the son are in bed reading. And, instead of just saying in bed reading, I said it's a copper trimmed bed and they have fluffy pillows behind them or, something like that. But, just to show like they were the royalty, here they're living in comfort.
And the use of those adjectives in that way give a whole different feel to what is the spirit of the picture.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. So it was a very interesting project. And then, our listeners may be wondering, well, okay, so then how would you publish that kind of project? And so this was a conversation with the author initially before we even brought Karin in, was, in her desire to be able to provide these descriptions and not to have a way for them to be included, but not necessarily be there for children who didn't need them or want them. We actually produced it as an audiobook that had two versions. So we had the version that was without the descriptions, and we had a version on like the next track where it included the descriptions. So it would really give the adults in children's lives and the children options. And then also there was talk about, how we might be able to use that, for example, on a YouTube version or Vimeo version of the audiobook, which would, obviously be including video, in which case, which we also do at Pro Audio Voices. We have a video team where we can create like animated versions of children's books with or without live action. And that's a whole other, we'll do a whole other episode on that. But what I wanted to call out is that having this kind of description then allows those entertainment experiences, if you will, also have even greater value for more children, because we're really dealing with accessibility issues and making them more accessible for visual impairments.
That's really great. Yeah.
What are some other projects that you've been working on recently?
Well, I have been working on a project with one of your clients, an audio supplement for an existing book that she had. She's making, and I don't know that whether or not how she feels about me mentioning the name. So I would imagine she'd be for it, but just in case I won't. But it's a book that's got an educational component. So she wanted to create something that teachers could use or for homeschool situations that they could plug in the book and have this little extra to get more out. Her book has so much rich information. And so there's like a little audio segment that comes before they read the chapter, and then they read it, and then comes after, and they explore the information in the book and go into more depth. But also there's a whole audio play portion to it that has sort of a fun setting, like as if you're a child in a class, and there are audio effects. So I've been working with her on that and the script, and that's been one thing that's fun about what I do is there's just so many different kinds of projects, and that's been it's been interesting to listen and to think about it as an audio experience, but it's also a lot of the same kinds of things. I'm thinking about vocabulary, I'm thinking about understanding, I'm thinking about, is this clear? Does this need to be longer? Does it need to be shorter? So,
right. Yeah. And that's really cool. This, and I know this is something that you do for, many different kinds of books, is this idea of this educational kind of supplement thing, that there are ways to take just a plain children's book, and there are often ways to expand the experience into something even more. I love exploring those kinds of things with authors because, it's like it dives into that why of the author. Why is this important to you? Why is this story important? What's the message here? What do you want your listeners, those kids, to get out of it? And that, when you start really exploring that, then typically you'll find that, there's something more that we could do to help them even more. And that is really where I get so passionate in helping authors figure out what those things are, and then finding the ways to deliver those and to better reach their audience, better serve their audience, and expand the whole offering.
Oh, I really like that. That in a way that just goes back to sort of like the very first question when I'll talk to an author before I start working on their project. And in those first questions, I'm asking, what is this? How did this start? What did this mean to you? What do you want your readers to get out of this? And, I love the idea that like there at the other end, you're like, what directions does that lead to? Yeah.
Right. And I'm thinking about just give our listeners some ideas on like what kinds of things might those be. You can chime in with the project that you're working on, but in terms of some of those ideas, but also creating ways on your website for there to be a related game or, a puzzle or just some engaging question for them to think about, and then to be able to engage with the author in some way around that question that might be helpful I'll give you a chance to
it comes up. I think it comes up in choices just about even what the title is of the book and what the cover looks like, because who are you trying to appeal to with this, Yeah.
We manage a podcast for one of our authors that came out of it. She has a young adult book with some important messages and themes around self-empowerment, especially for girls. And it developed from a full cast audiobook. Now it's a podcast, a monthly podcast, Spill the Tea with the Top-Notch Dogs. So there are all kinds of ways to really grow the ways that you can get that message out there. Fun to work with. Yeah. So how can our listeners learn more about you, your writing, your editing? Yeah. Where would they go?
The best place is my website, KarinFisher-Golton.com. Karin with an I. So KarinFisher-Golton.com.
We'll put that in the description of the episode as well.
Yeah. And so on that website, from there, you can go, there's a whole editing section of it where I have information about what I do, and my background specific to editing. Then my main website is about my writing projects, and I have a blog there too. I write poetry, so I post that on the blog, and just my thoughts about a person that is in awe of this world that we're in. That came from a quote from my grandfather, who lived in an apartment that had a beautiful view for many, many years. And then when he was about 90, he said to me, I've been here 35 years. And when I go out on the terrace, I'm still in awe. And
beautiful.
I love that. And I feel like that quality is in my life, to just notice the beautiful things in life.
That is so great.
Yeah. So that's where folks can find out more about me.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate what you're doing in the world and all that you're bringing forth and helping to bring forth in the children's book world. So, Karin Fisher-Golton, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you so much, Becky, for talking to me.
Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.